Good afternoon, everybody on the Eastern time zones. Good morning to those out in the West. It's really great to be here with my friend Jamie. My name is JP Gladue. I am the principal of Mokwate, also an advisor to the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, and also on the advisory board of those two on the amazing organization. We are in for a really great treat today. Jamie and I have actually just a little bit of background. Jamie, I'm calling in from my First Nation Sandpoint, which is on the eastern shores of Lake Nipigon, northwestern Ontario. And Jamie's been out to my community. Geez, that must have been about, I don't know, 20 years, 22 years ago. It's been some time. So you got to come back, Jamie, for a visit. I'll take you out fishing. That's really quickly about me. Jamie, why don't you spend a bit of time introducing yourself for our guests online?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, JP. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and with a lot of our mutual LinkedIn friends, I'm sure. I'm Jamie Lickers. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Indigenous Markets team at CIBC. Also a recovering lawyer. I'm not sure you really ever recover from being a lawyer, but I'm trying. I was in the private sector practicing at a national firm for a number of years in the Indigenous law space, and I'm from the Haudenosaunee community of Six Nations here in Southern Ontario.
Wonderful. Well, Jamie, it's good to have you here, and we all need lawyers. So, and I know when you visited our community, you were helping us with all sorts of background work in our community. So, thank you for everything you've done over the years and continue to do. Speaking of which, last year there was the 7th annual First Nation Major Projects Coalition Conference. It was absolutely stellar. Jamie, I'm going to ask you to weigh here in a second on some of your thoughts, but this year this year is the 7th annual, and our theme is the collective advantage, Indigenous consent. The dates are April 22nd and 23rd, downtown Toronto at the Sheraton. So it's like in the heart of Toronto. And it's, last year, as I was mentioning, it was attended by 1,500 plus attendees from across the globe. We had Indigenous leaders there. We had industry experts. We had government. We had policymakers. As I mentioned, bulk of the folks were from North America, but we did have folks from other parts of the globe. So this year is not going to be any exception. I know it's going to be another incredible event. Please do visit the website. The registrations are still open and they're still going really strong. It's fnmp.ca/conference. And keep checking in on for more details on the agenda. So the topics that Jamie and I are going to discuss today, and I'm really grateful to have her here because this is her world when we get into capital markets and finance. This conversation that Jamie and I are going to have this morning are also going to be elaborated over the couple of days in Toronto. So we're just kind of giving you a little bit of a taste. Reminder for the LinkedIn conversation this morning. I do, and Jamie do. We have this wonderful bar on the side that will host your questions that I'll field to Jamie a little bit later on. So, Jamie, your perspective from last year, and what are you looking forward to this year?
Yeah, last year was a great event. Obviously, I'll never forget right before we got started celebrating that moment when Ali announced that they had hit the 1,500 delegate mark, which was obviously a major accomplishment for an organization that really has not been around for all that long, and yet has managed to center itself at in the middle of this really important discussion around access to capital and supporting Indigenous equity participation in projects. So that was a really special moment that I'll never forget. But I also had the great privilege at last year's event of hosting a fireside chat with Bill Morneau, which for me was a personal highlight. And of course, Mark and I had so much fun co-hosting the event together. I always leave the annual FNMPC conference feeling energized and with a renewed sense of purpose and commitment for this collective work that we are doing. And the depth of the information that is presented and shared at the event is truly unparalleled. And I'm really looking forward to this year's event and all of the discussions around the importance of Indigenous consent to major projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. This organization is as relatively young as it is, it always seems to be on the cutting edge in front of the big issues. And interesting, we're in a lot of the finance discussion. This is the first time that we're going to be hosting it in Toronto. The past, it's been either online due to COVID, and then of course in Vancouver. And I'm one of my favorite things, talking about Mr. Ono, I got to interview him as the media host, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be the conference's media host again this year. So everybody, you've got to come to this event in Toronto. It's exceptional. You will leave with way more information and contacts, relationships than you went in with for sure. But, talking about cutting edge, our country right now, Jamie's the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, however you want to name it. Like, we've come to this place where we need capital in our communities to be able to participate in the economy in an equitable fashion. You've got a great view there at CIBC when you look at the opportunities, and I've heard you talk about these sometimes, and the challenges of bringing these the financing and infrastructure for infrastructure projects to the table. Can you give us a lay of the land?
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of an interesting perspective to bring together my legal practice and the legal background into this financing space. And I'm not the only Indigenous professional in the financing space that brings a legal background, and I think that is not a coincidence, because so many of the challenges that face Indigenous communities and First Nations in particular in participating in major projects are really a construct of legislation. We talk, for those that are involved in these conversations, we talk at length about the restrictions under the Indian Act and the challenges certain provisions in the Act have in allowing nations to utilize some of their most valuable assets as leverage for economic participation. And that's just a legal reality that we're all working through together. Obviously, the financial institutions have struggled with this, but I would say are also working hard to support and remedy this challenge so that nations and other Indigenous communities can access the capital that they need in order to participate in a just and meaningful way in projects that are happening in their territories. So, many of you will be familiar with the variety of guarantee programs that exist in our Canadian landscape. Some of those programs are jurisdictionally restricted in terms of whether they're provincial programs or territorial programs. And some of the programs tend to be limited from a sectoral perspective, in that the types of projects they're able to backstop might be limited to certain industries or infrastructure or green projects. And so, we're no stranger to the call to the federal government to create a sector agnostic federal loan guarantee program. And that's really a big, that's one of the major issues in the space right now.
No, you're absolutely right. Our communities are incredibly diverse across the country from many of the different types of assets that they have in their territories. It's interesting. A lot of, folks, when I just have our dinner conversations, I say, what, I couldn't go to the bank. I live on my reserve. I couldn't go to the bank to get a loan to build my house. And then my friends think I'm a little bit crazy because I've sunk most of my financial assets into my pine box home here, which I can't actually leverage out in the market. And, that's debilitating for a lot of Indigenous communities that have trouble getting access. And then the sectoral projects, of course, we've been spending some time with a group with Chief Charlene Gale and Nilo and Penny Favell. And, can you give us a lay of the land of what projects seem to have a little bit more give in them, I suppose, from access to capital markets, and how you see your institution playing a role in stacking or providing the equity to capital for communities to participate?
Yeah, we have a really exciting number of exciting transactions that are happening right now with our capital markets team, and of course we're not alone in that. I wish I could share all of the exciting details, but some of those projects and transactions are ongoing and subject to certain confidentiality requirements. But I'm really looking forward to being able to share hopefully some announcements in the near future. But what I can say generally is that we're seeing Indigenous opportunity in every area of the capital markets space. Indigenous participation, projects that involve, whether it's at an ownership level, whether it's in partnership, it's happening across the board in the capital market space. So, obviously there is activity in the pipeline and the transmission space, transmission lines in particular. But we're also seeing opportunity in asset deals, real estate, and in the acquisitions space generally, as not only as Indigenous communities look to engage, but conversely, corporate Canada and internationally, corporate players are looking to engage with Indigenous communities. They're actively looking for Indigenous partners on certain transactions, and they're coming to us on a regular basis to ask if we have introductions and collaborations that we can facilitate with our existing clients in certain industries or certain regions. And then, of course, you get a number of nations across the country with very sophisticated, very successful economic development corporations that are playing a more active role in both the acquisition and real estate development space. The growth in urban reserve lands is going to accelerate that opportunity, in my view, on the real estate side. And when I look back, JP, I think we all knew at the time that the Clearwater Seafoods deal was a really exciting development, but I think it was a real turning point in retrospect. And now in the industry, we're seeing an increased demand for investors who are themselves Indigenous and non-Indigenous companies who are looking to partner with Indigenous communities. So lots of opportunity.
That case, it shifted people's thinkings drastically. Remember, the non-Indigenous people were burning their boats, the Mi'kmaq boats, down in the shacks, and because they were fearful of what a moderate living meant for their communities. And all of a sudden, a year later, they're selling their fish to them. We got to pay attention. You're absolutely right. The ledger shifting. And Jamie, I know you've had tons of experience in this space between, bridging these relationships, Indigenous and non. What's some of the advice that you would give in your new role to proponents looking to develop infrastructure with communities, as well as communities themselves? I mean, you talked about the level of sophistication in some of our communities, which is top notch, top tier, not a doubt. And then there's the spectrum, which have less. If you can talk about kind of those two spheres and how to get them together in a little more productive way, and your advice.
Yeah, how do we all play nicely together in the sandbox, right? It's an age-old question, and I think on the proponent side, just a couple of key pieces of advice. One is, recognize what you don't know and recognize the limitations of your own knowledge and experience and the lens at which you view that through. It's probably going to be quite different than an Indigenous lens, I will say. And once you recognize the limitations of your knowledge and experience, go find good advisors to fill those gaps for you. There are wonderful advisors and consultants in basically every area that you might need assistance in, whether it's legal, whether it's community engagement, whether it's fostering collaboration among Indigenous communities themselves. Sometimes you're looking at a project that requires the collaboration of many nations in a region, and just bringing all of the parties to the table in a way that's productive can be a challenge. The other recommendation I would make for project proponents specifically is to avoid coming to the table with something that is fully baked, as we say. There has to be some room for meaningful input and engagement with the interested Indigenous parties and communities. And if your project or the transaction or the structure of it is determined and there's no ability for modification to meet the concerns and objectives of your Indigenous partners, you're probably not going to get very far. On the Indigenous side, my advice would be to work on that collaborative voice internally as well. It's a bit of a two-way street. Project proponents have to foster that collaboration when they require multiple nations coming together. But we also have a responsibility as Indigenous communities to come together and collaborate in a way that is meaningful. And finally, my advice to everyone, and this is, JP, you've heard me on my soapbox about this many times before, is please, please, please exercise good financial management. As both a banker and a lawyer, the value of having good governance practices, sound financial reporting, timely and up-to-date financial reporting, and audited financial statements, when you're coming to the financial institutions for support on your participation in projects and transactions, we really have to have the ability to evaluate the financial picture. So it's key.
Yeah, absolutely. For anybody that wants to go and get a loan for something, they want to know what your history is, for sure, so that you can predict your future. And that's that relationship. And you talked a lot about collaboration, and interesting, and then having nations come together. That Emirates deal was an extraordinary deal, and AOIC was an incredible part to the success of that. And we're starting to see loan guarantees. The BC just launched one. AOIC, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corp, has just they've been around a while now, and Chana, their CEO, is doing great work there. Ontario's got a light one. How, in broad strokes, does the CIBC mandate work within those envelopes, within those systems?
Yeah, we're huge supporters of the AIOC and other similar organizations that act to fill that void in the financing space by backstopping some of these opportunities. We've had the great pleasure of working with the AIOC on a number of mandates, including one of their very first transactions. But most recently, just this past December, we were working with the AIOC on the Wembley gas plant cogeneration facility, which I share because the information is publicly available on the AIOC's website. There's a great description of the project and the deal. But on that transaction, the AIOC was able to provide a $20.5 million loan guarantee to support a limited partnership of 5 nations, which came together to purchase an equity stake into that facility. And I think the model that the AIOC uses is generally working very well. The project guarantee support that they offer is truly project driven, which means that they're able to respond to the actual needs of Indigenous communities, whether it's in infrastructure and power or other areas. Mm-hmm. But they're able to remove the barriers to some of those startup costs in industries where the cost of entry can be prohibitive for many, not just Indigenous communities, but mm-hmm. some industries have incredibly high startup costs, and there are some real barriers for startup builds. So the guarantee plays a significant role in making those transactions financeable. And the deals aren't necessarily 100% Indigenous owned, but the guarantee removes that barrier for Indigenous participation by providing that backstop for these term loans, which facilitate the equity participation of communities, and also by allowing more favorable transaction terms for nations. So when you're backstopped by a strong government guarantee, you can have more favorable repayment terms. You can have longer repayment terms. Obviously, lower cost of funds, which translates into lower rates for the borrower. And it also, I think, importantly, frees up the balance sheet of communities to pursue other projects, which is also critically important.
Right. I mean, you're right. I mean, the catalyst to the FNMPC was the fact that they couldn't get affordable capital to participate in the gas pipeline. And, the forethought of the leadership, we can't let this happen again. We got to get affordable capital in the hands of our communities. And there are so many opportunities coming towards our communities. And I was digging up some numbers as you were speaking. I want to make sure that I got them right. But over the next decade, there's going to be 475 estimated by FNMPC natural resource projects in the hopper. There's going to be a requirement of about $545 billion required. 80% of them are going to be in the energy sector. And right now there are 17 infrastructure projects with the $40 billion in capital requirements right now that have been identified with community. So there is this massive shift that is happening in our country. So we've really got to start to get this right. Before I ask my next question, I want to remind the audience, or our listeners, please, there are opportunities to ask questions. Don't be shy, because this is a very smart Indigenous woman in front of us right now. So please ask the questions. The budget is coming next week. April 16th. And I know you've been such an advocate and champion and friend and partner to us at FNMPC. What are we hoping for here out of this budget? And you talked about startup costs and capacity. These are many of the areas in which our communities lack a lot of that. So, I mean, I would assume that's going to be part of the ask, but in our dream world, what does it look like, Jamie? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, I think the folks in our circles, you and me, JP, we're all on the edge of our seats here, waiting for the budget to drop next week. After the promise last fall of the development of a national Indigenous loan guarantee program, and we're all going to be looking for additional details on what that will look like. And my hope is that we have collectively accomplished the goal of conveying to the federal government the importance of really two key elements for that program. And one is that it needs to be sector agnostic, that Indigenous communities have their own governance, their own process for determining the kinds of economic activity and projects that they wish to participate in. And that the loan guarantee program should be available for all of those projects, regardless of the industry that they might be in, and that is really a necessary support for self-determination of a community's economic future. And second, it's really important that the program is able to operate at what I call the speed of business. And the speed of projects. If the loan program, if the structure, if the application process is too cumbersome, too slow, then in my view, a significant part of the value proposition will be lost. If it's too complex to navigate and if it's not timely, it's not going to have the same impact that I think we all hope that it will have. But I also think it's important that we all exercise a bit of caution in our reactions to whatever we learn next week, and keep in mind that perfection truly can be the enemy of progress. It's not going to be perfect. The federal government has said as much, and they could take more time to develop something that maybe is striving towards perfect, but it just means we go longer without access to a federal loan guarantee program. And so there will always be room for improvement as we work through this. But I think the most important thing right now is to get something rolled out, to get to be in a position where they're actually evaluating transactions and able to institute the process quickly for projects like the statistics you cited, right? There's so many projects that are ready to go. There's not going to be a shortage of demand for the program.
No, you're absolutely. Let's not the art of perfect get in the way here. And we're coming to this conference, and I've got some great questions coming up here. Thank you to our listeners to providing a few. But we're coming up Indigenous consent. And right now in the FNPC family, there are 4 projects with immediate needs of $750 million over the next 12 to 18 months for communities equity. I'm asking you a question that I already know the answer to, and that I know how you're probably going to answer it, but it's important for people to understand how important it is to get the capital out the door ASAP. What happens if we don't, and those communities don't have access to capital? What do you think is going to happen to those projects?
Well, they won't happen, right? And that's not good for anyone.
No.
I think it's no secret that the road to economic growth in this country is going to go through Indigenous territory. It can't not. That's the reality. And if we're not able to facilitate true partnership and participation among the communities whose lands are impacted, then our entire economy suffers, and we all as a collective, we suffer if these projects don't come to fruition. We have major infrastructure gaps in this country. We have massive housing shortages. The need for capital is real, and there are communities and project proponents out there that are ready to go with much needed projects. And if we can roll out a federal loan guarantee program that gets those transactions across the hurdle, then we're all better off.
Yeah. More of a specific question that's come up here from, and you talked about all the communities and their values and how they're going to place their capital when we get it. How can institutions like CIBC work better with communities to promote a model that is unique to each community? It's like how do you see the financial institutions playing a role there?
Well, I think the advice to the financial institutions, which I do my best in at CIBC, and of course it's a small space. We all collaborate with one another. So I know my counterparts at the other major financial institutions are working hard on the same things that I'm working hard on, and that is, look, we have to understand the needs of our clients. We have to understand their goals, their ambitions, the role that they want to play in the economy. And then we have to find a way to support that. And my advice to the financial institutions would be the same as the advice I just gave to project proponents, which is, you can't come in with a fully baked idea or your way of doing business that is standard and saying, well, this is how we do this, right? This is how these transactions are structured. This is the way it has to be. And that attitude doesn't always get you where you need to be when you're working on Indigenous projects, which have additional legal limitations, additional jurisdictional issues, access to capital hurdles. It can't be the same. If it could be the same, there wouldn't be hurdles. We wouldn't be having this conversation today if it was the same.
Yeah. No, we have to act and think differently in this the stacking of programs. Like, you're absolutely right, Jamie. You've got to really understand the relationships and the values of the communities if you're going to be effective in the way that we deploy not only our financial capital but our human capital.
And I think, JP, and I think you do that, and we're always talking about this, but I think you do that by bringing more young Indigenous people, young and old, right? Let's not discriminate based on age, but some of us old dogs can learn new tricks. And we just need more Indigenous voices in the finance space and the investment management space. Across the financial industry generally, Indigenous people are dramatically underrepresented. It's not a career path that was maybe in the traditional mindset of Indigenous communities to push their young people towards these careers. But I would encourage us as a collective to try to change that, because we won't have a better understanding of the needs of Indigenous people and Indigenous communities without Indigenous voices in the industry. And I don't want to be
Yes.
the only one.
No, of course not. And I don't want you to be the only one as spectacular as you are. Why would our communities push our people towards sectors that don't include our communities? Those are kind of the brain drain that happens. So we've been largely in sectors or health, mental health, legal, to fight for our community rights. And now we're at the table, at the business table. So I absolutely agree. As the past CEO of the CCAB, I mean, entrepreneurship, business, this is the economic horse, pulls the social cart. And, we need our young financiers to step up with you. So point well taken. Another question here regarding investors' preference. I mean, for sustainable investments, ESG, carbon neutral projects, etc. They're going to shape financial models. We've seen it. We've seen a little bit of to and fro as well. And instruments to support. What are the instruments with regards to those that support Indigenous partnership for ownership?
Yeah, I think we have seen the demand from both the market and from different investors. Look, financing is largely, and there's someone at my door. The joys of working from home. Our clients really drive our activity, right? If there's not a need for financing, if there's not a need for a particular product or service, then it doesn't come to fruition. And so if investors are asking for more sustainable finance, then you will see financial institutions respond to that. And we are seeing that in the rollout of a variety of different sustainable finance funds and different sustainable finance commitments by various institutions. Great announcement recently from Scotiabank on the work that they're doing on their Indigenous fund. We all advance together in this, and I love to celebrate the accomplishments of our competitors in the space as well, because it makes us all better. And I think that those demands are going to continue to grow from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous players in the space.
Yeah, our country is in a place right now. There's there's a lot of political posturing, a lot of change. Maybe a year and a bit out now from an election. I believe that we're so far down the path now that I don't think any one government is going to be able to unwind any of the hard work that's been done by many of our Indigenous leaders. From a capital perspective, Jamie, I believe it doesn't matter who's in there. I mean, we've got to get these programs out the door, and we have to be sector agnostic. You're looking into your crystal ball. I mean, what do you see for the future? I mean, I want to know exactly how many points, which party's going to be ahead by which time, and who's going to be our next prime minister, if not.
Well, I'm not a political analyst. I've wisely stayed out of that world. Look, we're all going to have to work within the framework of whatever the next government looks like. And no one, as much as I would like to think my crystal ball, it's only as good as anyone else's, and none of us have one that works all that well. But I think we do have to be prepared for a shift. We're in interesting economic times right now. I don't know that we've ever navigated an area where we're recovering from and emerging from a global pandemic, where we've seen interest rates increase as quickly as they have over the last number of months in the past year. going from a time of historically low interest rates, where attitudes from borrowers and project proponents was quite different than what we see today in the macroeconomic environment that we're in. And then we're going to layer onto that potentially a change in government and a change in policy and priorities. And we're going to have to navigate that. I think regardless, that economic prosperity will be a key pillar for every party going into the federal election. Bringing down costs and generating productivity and increased economic activity is good for the country, regardless of your political leanings. And a federal loan guarantee program is going to be a key piece of making that happen.
So eloquently answered. Thank you, Jamie. So in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to provide just a couple closing thoughts and then over to you, and then I'll just wrap up with a little bit about the conference. But, this has been a really great conversation. Every time I get to sit down with you, Jamie, I learn a few more things. And so thank you for being with us today. I think Canada needs to start looking at us as the competitive edge, really. When we capitalize our communities, and we're coming up to a conference of consent that is like a form of consent. We empower our workforce. We're creating certainty for companies going forward. And we're all about productivity right now. We've, in the OECD standards, we've been dropping and dropping and dropping. How do we get back to the top quartile within the OECD standings? And then, it's really got to get down to unlocking that capital so that we can be the equity partners in these projects. You and I both know it's not about saying yes or no to projects. It's about the information that comes to us, and do we see ourselves a part of something rather than on the outside we have been for a very long time. So, Jamie, any closing thoughts before I wrap up with a little bit more about the conference?
Yeah, no, I just think, again, it's such a timely discussion that will happen at the FNMPC event later this month, that it truly is our collective advantage, the economic power of Indigenous participation in our economy. It's truly unparalleled. And, this conversation has extended even beyond our borders. There's an event happening in London, England, in early May, called the Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit, for which CIBC is the lead sponsor. I mean, these conversations are happening internationally about the importance of Indigenous participation in our economy. So the time really is now.
Brilliant. That is a brilliant way to end. Thank you, Jamie. Also, thank you to everybody who's joined us today to listen in, to reflect, to ask some questions. Thank you so much. Again, Jamie and I are talking about April 22nd, 23rd at the Sheraton, downtown Toronto, for the 7th annual FNMPC conference. So you can go there and see the nice little ticker box, to register today at the fnmpc.ca/conference. We absolutely want to see you there. As I mentioned, there's going to be industry, there's going to be Indigenous partners from around the world, as well as companies, CEOs, governments. These conversations at the front of the room that are happening are incredibly rich. The conversations that you're going to have in the hallways are going to be extraordinary as well. And it's also going to give you an opportunity to meet Jamie and ask her some more tough questions that I didn't ask online here today. So again, we look forward to seeing you at the conference. Thank you again, Jamie. You're a rock star. I always love being in the room with you, virtually or in person. All the best, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, JP.